Michelle Marie McGrath. Welcome to today's episode of Unclassified Woman, and today I'm talking to the delightful Vienda Maria, who's currently based in New Zealand. Vienda is a writer and mentor who teaches women who want to do great things in the world how to choose freedom in life and work. Vienda's message has been shared by thousands across the globe on her own blog and platforms such as Clio Magazine, Tiny Buddha, Natural Health Magazine, Inspired Coach Magazine, and Raw. Connect with Vienda at viendamaria.com. And I'm always fascinated whenever I connect with Vienda. She's always in a different location around the world, and I find it really interesting to read and to hear how she manages that, how she manages to live and travel lightly and effectively while pursuing her dreams and running her business. So always so much to learn from this lovely lady, and so I do hope you enjoy. So hi Vienda, so great to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And lovely to talk to you about this. And I was just reflecting this morning on how we've actually collaborated on a couple of things, and we were in the book together, Love and Oneness.
That's right.
Yeah, and I was also thinking about that ebook that we contributed to that Adele McConnell put together, the Rituals ebook, where we touched on a lot of this topic. So I thought it's interesting, these different connections and correlations that we go through.
Yeah, and so interesting that we keep coming together around this topic. It's very funny.
Yeah, we've got similar values in that, the need for freedom and change. Just to give us some context, would you mind sharing a little bit about whether you've not had a child due to personal choice or whether it's been more of a circumstantial thing?
For me, it's definitely been a personal choice. And I don't know, when I was young, I was never one of those girls who dreams about getting married and having babies. It wasn't one of those things that I just thought were magnificent. I more dreamt about like creating beautiful things and falling in love. And it was more experiential, the things that I dreamt about. And I always thought, you know, if I want to have children or when I want to have children, I'll just know.
Yeah.
And then about 2 years ago, I was spending some time with my mother, and she sat me down and had this very serious conversation about how, you know, I was 33 at the time, that it's time to start looking at finding a partner that I could have children with. And up to that point, I was really not thinking about having children at all. And she brought up these ideas around her expectations that every woman must have children in order to live a fulfilled life as a woman. And while I respect that perception, it was not one that I carry myself. And so when she sat down and she like very seriously was like, okay, well, now it's time to really focus on this because you need to have children soon and all of this. And I was literally in shock. I was like, excuse me?
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. And again, maybe that's partly generational as well. And because that is what we're programmed. And that's the fairy tale that I grew up with, is when you grow up, you'll meet a nice man, you'll get married, you'll have a family. And even from a young age, I used to question, well, what if I don't do that? Because it was never a done deal for me either. Like, it was very similar that I thought, well, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not against it, but I don't feel it's the only way either.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's very interesting to have those conversations with family and friends when they've got a very different belief system. And look, I'm sure a lot of that is as well to do with, you know, maybe the way that she was brought up and what she saw as examples in her own life, maybe.
Definitely.
So how did you feel about that? Were you able to kind of express that maybe that was not going to be what you wanted to do, what you wanted to experience?
You know, that conversation didn't end well, I have to admit. It was a big turning point for me because I'd never really given this whole choice or lack of choice for some people much thought. I just thought I would let life happen to me. And so when we had that conversation and I told her that it's very possible that I would never have children because it's just not on my radar, it's not a really high value for me, she got really angry and she got really hurt and upset, and she felt that I was wasting my life and that I wasn't living up to expectations and that I was missing out on something huge and that my life would not have meaning. And that was, and I felt really hurt by that as well. Like, how can you say that my life is meaningless because I've decided that I don't think I want to have children?
Yeah.
So it wasn't a beautiful conversation. And I have to say, even like 2 years later, it's a touchy subject.
Yeah, of course.
But something really interesting happened for me from that conversation, where I, over a period of a week or so, really sat down with myself and thought about it, because I was like, okay, maybe I actually do. Maybe she's right in a way. Maybe I do have to make a decision.
Yeah.
And maybe that decision is for me to say, right now in my life, I choose not to have children because that's what feels right for me.
Yeah.
And while that choice is always open for change, if necessary, I get to decide right now that this is not for me, and that's okay. And it felt empowering and it felt freeing, but it also felt really scary. And I remember crying. I remember feeling really sad. It was almost, I was letting down not just myself or my mother, but like the world. It's really strange. It sounds funny, but it's like, I'm so sorry that as a woman, I've decided not to take on that aspect of being a woman.
Yeah. And you raise a really good point that I think often many of us can get stuck on, is the fact that something may be absolutely right for you in this moment and it will be completely different in the next moment. So if you're able to, it's actually okay to change your mind. It's only you that needs to be completely accepting of your decision about what's right for your life. And you could feel completely different in 6 months' time. Who knows? Like, you just don't know. It's just one of those things we don't know. We can't ever say anything is set in concrete because we just don't know. But that's your right to choose or to decide.
I agree with that so much. It's so good to be able to say, this is what's right for me right now, but leave it open to and being flexible to change, because we're fluid beings. We're constantly evolving and changing our minds, and different things are right at different times.
Absolutely. And look, for some women, it's completely clear. They always knew they were going to be a mother from being a little girl. It was what they always wanted. And they knew that it was going to be a central priority for them. But equally, there are many women who feel very ambivalent on the topic. And they don't feel that driving urge to, make that happen.
That's for certain, yeah.
So I'm hearing this more and more, actually, of so many women say, well, I wasn't against the idea, but I just felt as though there were also lots of other areas in life that I wanted to explore, and that it wasn't necessarily a top priority for me. And then as time went on, maybe they weren't in a relationship, or maybe they weren't in a relationship that they felt it was right to have that experience with that person. Or I've spoken to women who have been in very happy relationships with their partner, but the partner has either A, already got children, or is very clear they don't want them at all. So, there are all of these different factors that contribute to what's decided at that point. And again, these things change so much in our 20s, and then again in our 30s, and then again in your early 40s. So it's a constant fluid shifting situation where we're consciously having to make decisions all the time.
I also feel like, taking a step back and looking at the world from a bigger perspective, we're in a time right now where populating the planet isn't important.
Yes.
Like, there is more than enough people. And I wonder if, just because we are connected to everything and we're part of nature as human beings or animals too,
yeah,
if there's just this change in women, especially since we're the ones who bear children, that realizes that creating more life on this planet isn't necessary. And so the drive behind it is gone for many of us.
Yeah, I feel that's really true. And I've spoken to a few people recently who are very environmentally conscious and have really looked into this in great detail. And a few weeks ago, I was talking to a lady who said to me, in Australia alone, 5.5 million disposable nappies go into landfill every day. I was really shocked at that. So that's over 2 billion annually, and it's around 25 billion per year in the States. And then she mentioned that in Australia, there are over 45,000 children who are in foster care. And I was absolutely gobsmacked at that. And she was coming from the perspective of somebody who'd been adopted herself into a very loving family. And so she had felt that if she chose to have children, she would look into fostering, or adoption. She would explore those options as a first choice rather than, going through to have a biological child of her own. And I thought, I can see how more and more women are looking at this. And again, those processes are not very easy either. So it's much more complex. We're not struggling to keep the population going, far from it. And we're very quickly moving through the resources that are available to us. So it has to be a very serious consideration.
Such an interesting topic.
You had that tricky conversation with your mum. Have you had to face any other pressures from any other family or friends on the topic, or have they been more, open-minded and kind of understanding of where you're at?
I have to say that my friendship groups are very liberal. And so maybe half of my female friends have children and the other half don't. And the half that don't either are having troubles having children or they actually choose not to. And there has never been a conversation around like you should be having children or a woman's role is to have children. And that's also because, you attract people like yourself, I feel like. And so there's no social pressure, but I do definitely notice in society at large, there is an expectation for women to have children, to have a family, and that is the role of a woman.
Yeah. Yeah. And as we know, and we're examples of that, motherhood does not equal womanhood. It's really about defining what that means for you, and purpose and meaning are different for every person. And I remember doing some research a while ago, and I actually typed into Google, I wish I'd never had children. And oh my goodness, there are so many forums about this. So, again, these are the kind of things that we tend to not focus on. There are plenty of, very sadly, there are many neglected and abused children in the world. So it's not something that everybody derives great fulfillment from, even when they've embarked upon that.
I feel like having children has really been romanticized in the media. And I feel like those real conversations are kept hidden. I mean, my singing teacher and I were speaking about this the other day, and she's an incredibly creative, amazing woman. And she has one little girl who's 2. And she was telling me how hard it was once the baby was born, and that she didn't expect it to really change her life and have the impact that it did. And she felt like she didn't have the resources or the understanding, and that no one told her how time constraining and how full on and how 24/7 literally having a child is. And, I don't know if this is a more recent development, but a lot of women seem to be, in modern days, suffering from postnatal depression and things like that after having a child. And I don't know if it's because of the lack of support or the lack of the education around how challenging it is, or the expectations that women have around being able to do it all, have like an amazing career and the most beautiful house and the best behaved, well-dressed children, like everything. It's just crazy.
And tantric sex every night.
Of course, definitely. And the perfect body, no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, really, this whole, I mean, who is this superwoman, this paragon of virtue that can achieve all of this and juggle all these balls at the same time? So it's so unrealistic. So it's no wonder that depression and, postnatal depression, all these things are on the increase.
I feel like there's some really archaic thinking around having families instead of being really real around the topic. So there's like presumption that things have to go a certain way in a person's life in order for that life to be fulfilling and happy, which includes having children most of the time, without actually looking at the impact that has on someone's life or on the greater good. There is, as you were saying earlier in this woman's research also, that there's so many children who have been neglected or abused. And, how is that even happening? How are people having children and being allowed to have children and allow young people who are going to become adults have those kind of experiences? Like, I don't understand why this is even happening in our planet.
I know it's really a concern, and it's interesting that obviously we are becoming more and more aware of this, and the more you research and look at these types of statistics, it is quite shocking. And obviously, again, we have to remember that we're in an extremely privileged situation as Western white women who have even got any type of choice around this and access to medical care, fertility, all of this kind of thing, contraception, all of these options and different experiences. Like, there are obviously so many women around the world that it's not available to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, I guess that adds another layer around it.
Yeah, we are so lucky. I think sometimes I forget just how privileged we are to be able to make these choices. There's many, many places in the world where that's not a choice. It's not available. The education is not available. The resources aren't available. The support around it isn't available. So being able to make that choice is incredible.
It really is. Did you have any type of grieving process at all?
I would say there was definitely a sadness, and I did cry. And it was almost like, sometimes when you make a big decision or you make a big change, and even though you know it's the right thing, you grieve letting go of that old concept or that old paradigm within you.
Yeah.
So I definitely went through a grieving of the idea, because I was happy with the decision, but letting go of the idea and letting go of the pressure on myself and the expectation on myself that I would do this thing that everyone does because that's what we're supposed to do was huge. And I remember feeling it was a combination. It was like bittersweet, like a sense of relief, but also a deep sense of sadness.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially when you are in a loving relationship that you're happy with, and there's always a part of you that can imagine, what it would be like to have this beautiful little divine being that's an expression of your love for each other. Of course, you can imagine that as well, and imagine that there can be great joy in that, of course, but it's not that clear cut and black and white. And it's just not the path for every woman. It's not the role of every woman to be a biological mother, even if they're physically able to.
And I've had this conversation with, sorry, I feel like I just interrupted you.
No.
I've had this conversation with my partner around having children. And I remember him saying, you know what, I always thought that I'd have 2 children. Like, this was my life plan. He set it out, and then I'd have 2 children after 30, and then this, and then this, and then this would happen. But now I'm looking at the world and life around me, and I realize that having children isn't the be-all and end-all. It's not what's going to make my life whole and fulfilling. It's not going to be the thing that makes me a valuable human being. Actually, what I give to the world, the value I give to the world, whether to children or to anyone, is my what's the word? I can't think of it, but that's my gift to the world, what I give in whatever form that is. And having that conversation with him was both scary and important, because obviously when you're in a relationship, you want to be on the same page with certain things, especially having kids. And he was like, you know what, maybe in the future I do want to have kids and we'll have to have this conversation again. But at this point, I realized that it doesn't give me what I thought or what I've been told it would give me. That feeling of fulfillment and contentment and creating something important and valuable in the world comes from within me and not from me having children.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously for some people, it is incredibly fulfilling and that's the right thing for them. But when you're, I sometimes wonder if more people were very happy and fulfilled and complete within themselves already, it makes you wonder whether they would be that part of them that's urging to create something that feels meaningful to them. And it's something that I've thought about recently in talking to a lot of creative people who've not had that urge, but it makes me wonder if they feel that sense of satisfaction within themselves because they're creating in another way. They are expressing themselves in the world in whatever form is right for them, whether it's through writing or traditional forms of creative expression. But, as we know, there's no limit to that. It's really about self-expression. So obviously you write, and through your work, you're expressing yourself creatively in that way. And so do you feel that contributes to you feeling, a sense of fulfillment?
Absolutely. I feel like whatever creative expression we choose, whether it's through having children or creating artwork or writing or whatever it is, that I think that is where fulfillment comes from. And it was really interesting. You were just speaking about people gaining a sense of fulfillment or like feeling a lack maybe that they feel within themselves through having children. And you teach people all about self-love. And I feel like that message needs to be taught above and beyond anything, especially around having children, because I can refer back to my own experience with my mother. My mother was 21 when she had me, and she had me on purpose. Well, there's a word for that. So I was planned, so to speak. But she's only 21. So I'm like, how much planning did you really do? But for her, and this was a really challenging thing throughout our relationship, was that she was lacking in love and she didn't know how to love herself, and she didn't have anyone teach her how to love herself, and she didn't understand what self-love was. And so she had a deeper desire to be loved, and she thought that by having a baby, she would feel the love that she deeply craved.
Yes.
And so I came into the world, a tiny little soul with this weight on my shoulder to give my mother the love she was missing.
Yes. Yeah.
This caused so much friction and tension and problems in our relationship because you can't give another human being that kind of responsibility. The only person who's responsible to love you is you. Always, always. And so I'm sure this isn't the only situation where people have chosen to have children because they wanted love in their life. But
Absolutely.
It is definitely not a healthy or balanced or harmonious way to approach the concept of love, where you decide that someone else is responsible for you feeling love.
Absolutely. And, it's really interesting because often, like one of the, the stereotypes that we hear is often when people have chosen not to, we hear that thing, the accusation of being selfish and self-absorbed and all of these kinds of things. But if you asked somebody why they, want a child or why they had a child, most people would say, well, I really wanted one. Mm-hmm. And if you start to then dig deeper about their motivations, that's a really interesting conversation, and people can get extremely defensive about it. And well, what do you mean? Like, I just always knew I'd have a child. Oh, okay, yeah, but why? Why do you feel? What was driving that? And it's a really interesting area to explore because, like what you've just said, I feel unconsciously that would be a driving factor for so many people, but they wouldn't necessarily, maybe they're not consciously aware of that.
For sure.
So it's interesting that, you know, there was a book, Selfish, Shallow, Self-Absorbed, which is by Megan Dorm, and that is 16 essays by writers who wrote about their decision not to have a child. And of course, every story and experience in that book, there's so many variables, all completely different. And one of the comments that was in that book, mentioned in the book, that really stayed with me is that often self-knowledge is confused with self-absorption. So often people are accused of being self-absorbed when in actual fact they have really, you know, taken a long time to consciously consider this situation from every angle, and it's coming from a very well-considered, responsible place.
Yeah.
It's not coming from a place of self-absorption. It's coming from something that they, you know, they take this very seriously, and they understand that it's a huge lifelong commitment that's very challenging, and they don't take it lightly, you know. So I often wonder if more people took that time and really examined their motivations, maybe they'd make a different choice.
I feel like it's such a precious thing to wait until you feel like you're making the decision, whichever way it goes, from a space of wholeness rather than from a space of lack or fear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, look, that's so true for any of these big life decisions. And as women, it's one of the biggest topics we will ever have to consider.
Absolutely. Fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. And just, you know, some people just never feel that physical craving or urge. And it seems to be that more and more women are speaking out and really admitting that out loud. Well, I just never felt that ticking clock. I never had that hormonal craving that some women talk about. And so I think the more that we can voice all of these different expressions, then, you know, the more empowering and supportive it is for all women, really.
I agree with you so much. I feel like the more we share our own personal journeys and stories, the more we free each other and empower each other to make our own personal choices as well, instead of feeling like we all have to be like sheep and do the same thing because that's what's expected.
Absolutely. And obviously, you know, depending on the type of work and your vocation and what you're doing as well, has also, you know, is such an important factor. And like the work that you're doing, whereby you've got a freedom based business, really, where you don't want to be tied to being in one location indefinitely. And that's obviously the beauty of the internet. And so would you feel that that's one of the major benefits of not having a child?
I would say, I mean, I've never had a child, but I've definitely taken care of a lot of my friends' children for periods of time. And I mean, so much energy and time and attention is devoted to taking care of another being that you cannot have the freedom to just up and go whenever you want, because it takes such a lot of commitment to manage someone else as well as yourself. I mean, there's a lot of freedom in not having responsibilities for other little people when you don't have children. So yeah, definitely, like having children would change my lifestyle tremendously. I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah, and also I think that's an important point that you make, that, you know, having that responsibility for a child, but that doesn't then mean that when people don't have children that they have no other responsibilities. And that can also be a common misconception that I've noticed, that often it can be the sibling in the family who's not got children. It often then, you know, there is this expectation that they then take on extra duties, maybe caring for a parent or another relative in the family, and take on other bits and pieces, because it's almost, you know, it can be often deemed like, well, you've got the time to do that, as though that their life and what they're doing with their time is somehow less important.
It's so true. And actually, I find that a little bit frustrating when people assume that just because you don't have children, you've got all of this free time and you can just, drop whatever you've got going on for them, or that it's not as important because you don't have children.
Yeah.
It's really like, I'm so surprised. And I mean, amongst my peers, it doesn't happen so much, but amongst other people, I definitely notice it where they're like, well, you don't have kids, so you can just drop everything and help me. And it's like, well, no, actually, I do have commitments and responsibilities that I've decided to take on, and they're important and valuable to me as much as your children are to you.
Yeah, so true, so true. So, look, the more openness and the more compassion that we can extend towards each other and just more tolerance, then it's going to be easier, hopefully, for every woman to make the choices that are right for her.
Yeah, I agree. It's so important for us to make our own choices based on what's true for us.
Absolutely. And so, amen to more of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Vienda. And can you share with us the best place to find you online and more about your work?
Sure. Thank you so much. This conversation is so fascinating and juicy for me. So I'm really grateful to be able to share it with you.
It really is. And it's just, there's so many variables and just so many aspects.
Absolutely. I'm a writer and mentor who teaches free-spirited women who want to do great things in the world how to do so with more freedom in their lives and their work. And that includes women who have children. So it's about bringing in those elements of freedom and also changing your mindset around what's possible and what freedom means to you. And the best way to find me is on my website, which is my name, viendamaria.com.
Beautiful. And yeah, you've got so much gorgeous pieces of writing on there. So highly recommend that you check that out. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you as well.
Thank you for listening to Unclassified Woman. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. For information on events and services, connect with Michelle at michellemariemcgrath.com.